If you need a circa 90s, early 2000s phone sound. I said I'd be giving you tips and tricks, so major trills. Howdy, Sonic Sailors. I'm Marissa Johnson, but you can call me MJ. I'm a producer for Soundpaint and H.A.L with a bachelor's in bassoon performance, music composition, music theory, and a master's in film music composition. When Trolls asked me if I wanted to do this walkthrough, I absolutely had to say yes. The bassoon is an instrument I am so passionate about and is near and dear to my heart. I played for over 15 years. This library is just the perfect YouTube debut for me, and I cannot wait to explore the 2010 Bassoon Firebird with you. So, let's dive in. So we've got 22 articulations in this library, each with 3 microphone positions, close, deca, and wide, totaling 66 parts, all of which are used in the 38 programs I made. So we're going to go through the main articulations, and then we're going to get to the really good stuff. So all the time does is it adjusts, obviously adjusts the speed, so you can have it play faster or slow it down completely. And just, I've got the pedal down, but just have it freeze forever if you want. So if you need any of these arcs to be longer or shorter, time is going to be your best friend. So reset time and turn it off for this next part I'm going to show you. This is something that is going to apply across the entire library with the exception of legato. All of the articulations are automatically velocity based, but you have the option to use dynamic sustains, which we're going to get into in just a second. Now we've already heard the velocity based arcs. Yeah, that volume is going to be determined, obviously, by the velocity of your fingers on the keys. But if we turn on dynamic sustains, which is going to be found in sound mode, all you have to do is flip it on. Dynamic sustains have the MW next to it because it means that when it's on, it's automatically mapped to the Modwheel. But when you use dynamic sustains on arcs, you can change the dynamics of the arc itself, like this. With this library, we're all bassoonists now, and time and dynamic sustains just make us even better players. If you want to be a contrabassoonist as well, you just have to explore the lower range of this library, and you are now a contrabassoonist. This is really difficult on the bassoon, and just sample libraries make it painfully easy. You guys don't know how good you have it to be able to play the bassoon like this instead of like this, you know? Anyway. Out of all the woodwind instruments, the bassoon is, if not the best, one of the best at these short, crisp notes. That's partly because the double reed, but I mean, with time and the art just makes it even better. I mean, these Staccatissimos are practically perfect. If you're not interested in nerding out over bassoon history, go ahead and skip to the next section. But if you are, welcome, fellow bassoonists. So this Baroque bassoon program was inspired by the Baroque bassoon. They're actually professional bassoonists who specialize in playing Baroque bassoon music on instruments that are essentially replicas of Baroque bassoons because they are vastly different from the modern bassoons we have today. Baroque bassoons and modern bassoons still have that same basic design with a double reed, bocal, and that folded body. But there are a few differences between the Baroque bassoon and the modern bassoon. Baroque bassoons had like 3 keys and 7-ish holes, whereas modern bassoons have 24 plus keys and only 5 finger holes. The simpler design from the Baroque bassoon contributed to a more muted sound than the sound we know from the bassoon today. The birth of the modern bassoon dates back to the 1800s with instrument maker Johann Adam H.A.L, who developed what we now know as the H.A.L system. The H.A.L bassoon is essentially a design for the bassoon that added more keys, made it more playable, but also gave it this rich, dark sound that we know from the bassoon. There are many great bassoon makers across the world, but H.A.L is still around and they are the most sought after instrument maker, period. Just to give you an idea of how sought after these instruments are, to get a new H.A.L bassoon, there's an 8-year waiting period, $5,000 deposit, and the new instrument costs about $50,000. Out of all the woodwind instruments, the bassoon has evolved the most over the last couple hundred years. So many keys have been added to it. The design has changed, making it a more playable and versatile instrument. They have this rich, warm sound and are these beautifully complex instruments that are hard as hell to play. In my opinion, they are the most difficult woodwind instrument, but they are so much fun and they are just absolutely gorgeous. So let's play some more. Easter came a little bit early this year because I'm going to give y'all a sneak peek of some instruments we've got right around the corner with this next program. I really like this program, and we're going to see it again in the demo I wrote, so I'll see you in the DAW. You can see all the programs listed in the track titles. Basically, if it's not an ARP or a drone, then I just added a gate to it. But let's check out the bassoon programs I used. So here we've got the double require, sounds like this. For the bassoon Staccatissimo, you'll see that it's one long MIDI note, and all I did was turn on the art, add a stereo imager so that it's not just straight down the middle, and so that it pans a little bit left to right. Yeah, you get the idea. For the bassoon arc, it's just the program straight out of the box. On this track, I used our Legato ROS program, which I'll get to in just a minute. But all I did to modify it was add just a little bit of chorus to make it a touch synthier. It would have blended if I hadn't added the chorus, but I just thought it sounded really cool with it, so I kept it. So this Legato ROS is a program I actually made specifically for this last demo we're going to take a look at. We're going to be taking a look at the iconic bassoon solo from the Rite starting Rite of Spring by Igor Stravinsky. Again, if you're interested in a little bit of history about the Rite of Spring, feel free to stick around. If not, just go to the next chapter where I will see you in the DAW. If you're still here, hello, and welcome to a brief history of the Rite of Spring. So the Rite of Spring is a ballet with music composed by Igor Stravinsky and choreographed by Václav Nijinsky. So the story of the ballet is about the return of spring, or the rite of spring, and the renewal of the earth through the sacrifice of a virgin who was chosen to sacrifice herself by dancing to death. As I mentioned earlier, the Rite of Spring actually started a riot when it premiered. Whether it was a political climate at the time because it was a year before World War I broke out, maybe it was Stravinsky because he composed something that was radically against the musical norms at the time. Maybe it was because there was this primal ritualistic choreography that was in ballet, which was this high art form at the time. Or maybe, if you're like me, I think it was a little bit of everything. So the Rite of Spring Ballet was a fairly vast departure from the ballets that Stravinsky had written. All the shouting in the audience from the riot supposedly got so loud that the dancers on stage could not hear the music from the orchestra, and they had no idea where the beat was, so Nijinsky had to bang his staff on the stage so that they could keep time because they just couldn't hear the music. The premiere of the Rite of Spring is still considered to be the biggest scandal in orchestral music history, and why wouldn't it be? It starts with a bassoon solo and ends in mayhem and chaos. So let's go to the DAW for some MIDI mayhem and chaos. And the iconic bassoon solo, of course. Just so you know where all these sounds come from, all of the woodwinds are from Soundpaint, with the exception of the bass clarinet. The bass clarinet is from the H.A.L Warm Studio Woodwinds Library. The brass and strings are both from the H.A.L Century Strings and Brass Libraries, respectively. So I've actually been able to play 2 pieces by Stravinsky. The first piece was the Firebird Suite, which was written before Rite of Spring and is definitely way easier than Rite of Spring and his works post Rite of Spring. The Firebird Ballet, which premiered in 1910, and for which this library is named after because I named it, also has a famous bassoon solo in it from the Berceuse. The second piece I played was the Octave for Winds, which was written about 10 years after Rite of Spring, and I have never had to count and subdivide in so many different ways in a piece of music than I did for that octet. I was literally flying by the seat of my pants pretty much the entire time. It was pretty insane. This mock-up was actually really challenging for me to do. There's a lot of really crazy rhythmic things going on, and I basically just had to be kind of meticulous with the score while inputting this MIDI just so that everything lined up perfectly so it sounds like organized chaos. I actually got to a point working on this mock-up where I told Trills, I said, hey, I think I might have to abandon the Rite of Spring just because it's not sounding the way I want it to. You know, I know these H.A.L libraries really, really well. I made all the programs for the libraries that have been released so far and some of the ones coming up, and it took me a minute to figure out why this mock-up wasn't sounding the way I wanted it to sound like. But I finally figured out that the problem wasn't the sample libraries, the problem was me. Me being meticulous with this mock-up meant that all the MIDI was just locked to the grid, and that killed the realism. After massaging the MIDI quite a bit, we have the mock-up as it is now. I could probably massage it a little bit more, but this was good enough for me, so here we are. Anyway, let's take a look at what the bassoon is doing. So combination of legato ROS and the sustain, and we've got a Rite of Spring solo. So you'll notice for the solo I've got the legato lyrical. It's just a little softer than the combo and the strong R. And then we've also got the sustain. The reason this is here is because the Rite of Spring solo plays a high D, and the legato playable range is a C sharp, so it's a half step away. The high D is tongued anyway, and it's not legato. I'm perfectly okay with the sustain being here. It's just I added sustain instead of just letting it play into the extended range, just because it sounds better and I had a little more over control over what the sustain does in the program. But something I want to talk about as we go through this mock-up is the difference between having something that is even locked to the grid or even loosely locked to the grid versus free-flowing, because it really does affect the realism of what you're trying to do. So here's the solo again, locked to the grid. Now out of the DAW and off the grid. Hopefully you can hear that it just breathes more. It feels more expressive and realistic because it's not locked in the DAW. Because I do know this solo and I learned this solo on the bassoon first, it was a little weird learning it on the keys, but this is easier and it also sounds really, really good. I've got a lot of expression from this library with this legato, and it's just chef's kiss. You might have noticed some contrabassoon listed as well in the track list. We've got that extended range with the arcs and the sustain. So if you need a contra, you have it in this library. The Rite of Spring bassoon solo is fairly technically challenging to play, but for everyone else in the orchestra as well, I mean, the whole piece is just organized chaos, essentially. We're actually going to go through a couple of these woodwind libraries just because I love them so much. If you know our Soundpaint libraries, you know we only have one clarinet, and it just happens to have the range that I needed for the clarinet in D, so it gets the job done just fine. The legato sustains in these orchestral woodwind Soundpaint libraries are all arc based, and so I don't have to do anything other than That's how good this library is. So legato MIDI typically needs to overlap just a little bit so that the legato is activated, but in Soundpaint the legato doesn't have to, because we have legato time, which makes that time extend and gives you that overlap automatically in the engine so that your MIDI doesn't have to. Which just means that with Soundpaint libraries, I just don't have to massage the MIDI as much, and that saves me so much time. We're also going to take a sneak peek at the English horn because it sounds really good. You'll notice some trills in the alto flute part, and I actually had a track for just trills and a track for the legato, and lost time trying to find the balance between the two and making the sound good or whatever. I messed with time with the trills, and it sounded good, but for this track specifically, I just wanted legato to do it because I know it can. Obviously, I could modify the MIDI trills, but like, I mean, so this last part in the flute was the worst sounding part to me. I mean, this is only like 9 notes in the score that all has to fit in a beat, and it just sounded so robotic because it was locked to the grid. But again, just massaging that MIDI just a little bit, getting it off the grid, making it a little more loose, made it sound a lot better. If you made it this far, thank you for watching my first ever tutorial. I hope it was helpful to you. This library has so much that can be explored. You can find me on our Soundpaint Discord as Marissa Johnson. Feel free to send me a DM. You can reach me anytime there. If you're interested in another mock-up from me or another tutorial, feel free to drop it in the comments and I'll see what I can do. But until our next adventure, take care.